We are away. Wonderful. So, James chapter 2, and a very classic Jamesy passage, isn't it? But first, of course, the obligatory granddaughter pictures. These are both on Father's Day. And Talitha is here today. We're hoping she'll keep up her 100% record of sleeping through my sermons. There's the passage. Not a lot of big words. Probably prostitute is the biggest word. It's pretty plain and very practical, isn't it? And it doesn't surprise anyone that the most practical book in the Bible is written by Jesus' half-brother who literally grew up with him. Sort of makes sense, doesn't it? And the outline is very practical, looking after your brother and sister in need, not just saying it, being aware of it, and doing nothing. Faith without action is useless. You need to be like Abraham or like Rahab and have a faith that actually works. Not everyone is a fan of James. Martin Luther was not keen on James. He wanted it left out of the canon. Anyone have any thoughts why he would want it left out of the canon? Having just read that passage. The prostitute was not the issue. Salvation, grace or works, which is it? Martin would say, James, oi, bro, I'm trying to run a reformation here, and you're killing me. It does certainly look like a contradiction, doesn't it? Paul saying we're justified by faith without works, and James saying we're justified by works, not by faith alone. It really does look like a contradiction. Some people say it's a paradox. Like, do we choose or are we chosen? That's a paradox. Both are true, but this is not a paradox. Martin said, look, lots of people try to harmonize it, but it's really unharmonizable. They're opposite. Either faith justifies or faith doesn't justify. They contradict each other. You can't have it both ways. If anyone could harmonize them, I'd give them my doctor's hood and let them call me a fool. Well, at the risk of calling Martin Luther a fool, it's not a contradiction. We're going to see the problem here is seeing that they are somehow arguing against each other, that they're sort of facing off, some sort of theological cage match. James against Paul. The reality is that they're actually back-to-back defending the same thing, but facing different opponents. And I wonder if I could illustrate it. So let's say you pop over to Al's for a cuppa and he's on the phone, but he waves you to come in and you hear him say these words, I don't love the blues. Anyway, the phone call wraps up and he greets you and you're talking, and then his phone rings again and he's talking and listening and you hear him say these words, I love the blues. And you think, this guy, that is a contradiction. That really is a contradiction. Well, in the first one, Kristen, Father's Day is coming up and she's asking him if he wants a blues jersey for Father's Day. And he said, I don't love the blues. The second phone call is Leisha, and she's got some ideas for some new music genres. Maybe some Negro spirituals, some Kentucky bluegrass, maybe some jazz. What about the blues? What do you think of the blues? And Al says, I love the blues. The words are the same, but there's no contradiction because they mean different things. And that's what we're going to discover. They're back-to-back defending the same thing. Let's start with Paul. Who was Paul's opponents when he made his phone call, his argument, his case? They were the guys that thought we could earn salvation by obedience to the law. And so when he talks about faith, he's talking about a saving faith, accessing grace, not by working through the law. His opponents, if you want to give them a name, are the law lovers. And pretty much all his writings, Ephesians, Romans, Galatians, they're all very strong on we are saved by grace through faith, not by the law. No law can save us. So these legalists are trying to earn salvation by adherence to religious laws. That's who he's talking against, and that's what he means by works. When he talks about faith, he's talking about an incredibly powerful thing. Tozer says it well. The faith of Paul was a revolutionizing thing. It upset the whole life of the individual, made them into another person altogether. It laid hold on the life, brought it under obedience, took up its cross, followed after Jesus, captured the man, made them a happy love servant of the Lord. It realigned all life's actions, brought them into accord with the will of God. It made him little, God big, and Christ unspeakably near. All that and more happened when that person had faith. So what Paul's talking about by faith is a powerful, life-changing thing, isn't it? And Al's been trying to teach us for years that faith actually has 3 dimensions. It's not relational, kingdom focused. No, not that one. What's the 3 dimensions of faith? Belief plus trust plus action. So there's an intellectual side where we get it. We get that our identity now is in Christ. There's nothing we can do to earn his favor. We don't have to try hard. We know who we are. So there's an intellectual side. But there's a side where we give over our will, our volition. We surrender once, but then habitually we hand over the steering wheel of our life to God. And then it becomes a pattern of behavior, doesn't it? It becomes a lifestyle. So the faith that Paul's talking about really has all those dimensions to it. An intellectual side, a will side, and then a habit or an action side. And what he talks about when he used the word works is people trying to follow the law. Now, when James talks about faith, as Kate read, he's talking about someone who says they believe something, but it doesn't change their behavior. Yeah, I believe, but it doesn't touch their life. And what he means by works is exactly what Paul means by the action of faith, living out a live faith, real faith, living faith, the action that flows, the trust and the behavior and the fruit that flows on from that. So James is saying real faith includes works. By that he means the actions that show we belong to him. And saying we believe something is useless. So he's actually saying what Paul is saying, that real faith is belief plus trust plus action. Paul's arguing because we've been saved, we behave very differently. And James is saying real living faith shows itself up in our behavior. In the end, we are saved by works, but it's God's work, Jesus' work on the cross that saves us. And faith is the faculty that we access it through. They're both saying the same thing. Paul's strongest statement about grace is probably here in Ephesians. We all know it. You've been saved by grace through faith, no works. It is a gift. But what's the next line? For we are his workmanship, created to rest on the grace, created for good works. So he can't help but, in the almost the same thought, talk about the works that we've been saved to do. We're not saved to sit on the grace and relish it somehow, but to actually launch into the behavior. So the people that James were writing to were what we might call hyper grace. So antinomians is the law. They're against the law. Paul's group were the law lovers. James's group hate law. They exaggerate grace. They say, because I say I believe, I can live however I want. And both of them are arguing that's not really how it works. Faith has belief plus trust plus action. So they're really essentially back to back fighting different opponents, saying the same thing. So James points out a couple of examples: Abraham, the patriarch, and Rahab, the prostitute. Jill, you remember God took Abraham outside, no light pollution. How many stars could you see? A lot. And he said, these are going to be your children. At that time, how many children did Abraham have? 0. So Abraham believed, and it was counted to him as righteousness. And he embarked on his adventurous life, trusting God. Ups and downs, surely, but it was counted to him as righteousness. Hebrews talked about Abraham went, that God called him up out of Ur, and he went in faith, in trust, in action, not knowing what was ahead. Huge element of faith, which is why he finds himself in the hall of faith in Hebrews 11. Abraham is there, right beside Rahab. So by faith, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, blah, 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 blah. And by faith, Rahab. Some versions have the innkeeper, trying to sanitize it perhaps, but she wasn't an innkeeper. She's in there too because of what she did. You remember the story? Everyone loves Lego. God said to Joshua, go in, possess the land. I've given it to you. He sends the 2 spies in. I want you to check out this city of Jericho. They go to the innkeeper's house because that won't raise eyebrows. And then the king hears that there's Israeli spies. So the soldiers rock up at Rahab's place, hand over the spies. Now, Rahab had worked out that the God of the Israelites was the one true God. And maybe she was praying. She wanted to somehow align herself with him and then knock on the door. This is her chance. So she tells the soldiers that the men have gone, hurry, you'll catch them. But really, she hid them on the roof. And then she talks to them. She said, I've worked out your God is the real God, and I want to be on your side. So when you come and conquer, please save me and my family. And they say, okay, deal. You put this scarlet cord out your window, and everyone who's in this house is going to be saved. So she could have rested on that, but she gathered her family in and saved the spies, and her whole family got saved. And Joshua says she lives amongst the Israelites to this day. There she is. That must be Tel Aviv, I think. She probably wouldn't stand out in Tel Aviv. The spies had an awkward story to tell their wives. And there she is in the genealogy. Isn't it classic God to put her in the genealogy of Jesus? She aligns herself with God. Matthew Henry says it beautifully, I think. Rahab the prostitute had only ever heard about God, speaks with more assurance about the truth of the promise made to the fathers than all the elders of Israel who got to see them. This woman gets it, and she aligns herself. And so she enters into the family of faith. So we've got a patriarch and a prostitute. James points out these are examples of living faith, real faith. And a nice summary quote, we are saved by faith alone, but the faith that saves us is never just an idea. It's never on its own as a concept. It's always going to have behavior to it, living faith. So imagine I told you one of these is a seed and one is a rock. How could you tell the difference? Plant them and water them, give them some sunshine. The one on the right will turn into this plant. Does anyone know what that plant is? It does look like marijuana. How did you recognize that? And the one on the left will be unchanged. Why is the left one unchanged? Because it's a rock. And does the fact that it turned into a plant make it a seed? No, it was a seed, therefore it turned into a plant. And that's what James and Paul are arguing. So your behaviors reveal the reality of the life, if you like. That's how it works. The growth revealed what was there already. And the living tree takes the photons from the sun, the nutrients from the soil, turns it into new growth. The dead tree is a dead tree. So one sermon I listened to had a long, long list of signs to look for in someone's life as to whether they have a living faith or not. I think you can reduce it to just one and maybe even 3 words. Who's their boss? Doesn't mean we don't make mistakes, but when we do, we repent, don't we? And that makes us change. We grow. So you can see Paul and James are sort of back to back, fighting the law lovers, the law haters, defending the real thing, defending real faith. And the way that relationships work, we invest in relationships and we grow deeper. We don't invest in relationships and the opposite happens. So Paul and James are really saying the same thing. And the application for us is pretty straightforward, isn't it? We have to go deeper, deeper in belief. What are you learning? What are you reading? What are you understanding? How are you deliberately, intentionally taking your knowledge of God deeper? Trust is like a muscle. What trust adventures are you on with God? You have to exercise it. What are you gambling on the goodness and the power of God in your life? And action, what are you doing? What's new? What's different? You really have to hear God to act. So I've been reading books about hearing God. This is a classic one by Dallas Willard. And let me show you something he said. When we love people, we want to please them. We don't want this only in order to avoid trouble or gain favor. It's our way of being with them, or sharing their life. The gushing pleasure of small children as they help their parents comes from the expansion of the child's little self through immersion in the life of a larger self to which the child is lovingly abandoned. With their parents, children can do big things that they can't do alone, but they'd have no interest in doing these things apart from their parents' interest. So you get what he's saying so far? We get a sense of it as adults when we have requited love. That's when 2 individuals love each other. When in the manner appropriate, the 2 become one. They identify with one another, expanding themselves. The beloved, who both loves and is loved, doesn't want to order the lover about. Instead, the beloved desires that the lover understand what is needed so that no orders are necessary. Love is designed to be our way of being with others. You get that? In this union of souls, in the conscious delight and rest in one another, which is the highest and most exalted relationship possible between 2 persons, it is not right for one person to always tell the other what to do. And so it is in our union with God, a person both loving and beloved. He doesn't delight in having to always explain what his will is. He enjoys it when we understand and act upon his will. Our highest calling is to love him with all our being. So I read that and I was skeptical. Are you saying that it's hard to hear from God because he doesn't want to tell you what to do? I was very dubious. And then my wife went to a Turkish lamp making workshop Saturday about 2 weeks ago. There she is having fun. And when she came home, I was on the phone to our son, Ben. And Karen jumped on and she told Ben how awesome it was and how much fun she had. And she said, and your dad brought me coffee. And Ben asked a really interesting question. 4 words. Did you ask him? Isn't that fascinating? Has he been reading Dallas Willard? What does it matter? What's Ben even thinking? So in scenario A, there I am in my own world, lost, busy, doing stuff. was actually preparing the sermon, and I get a text message, tells me what she wants, where to go, how to do it, and I pay attention and I obey. That's scenario A, specific attention and obedience. What's scenario B? What would it look like if she hadn't asked me? How does that even work? Exactly. So there I am thinking about her. She loves her morning coffee. She didn't get her morning coffee this morning. She's going to be busy, but not so busy that she can't drink coffee. Because I was listening, I know where this place is. And so with knowledge and love and initiative, you act. Now, does anyone know which one was real? It was scenario A. But Ben recognizes A and B are not the same. B is a higher level of relationship, isn't it? Husbands, if you noticed, helping your wife without being asked, it's really interesting, like chore play. It's really appreciated. There's something about thinking of a person intentionally, knowing them. It's like a really thoughtful gift. Isn't that appreciated? There's something about scenario B. I'll finish with this story. So I'm having a quiet time a few years ago, and in student life, we were taught quiet times shouldn't be like coming to your therapist or your personal trainer or ordering from a menu. It should be like a soldier getting his orders for the day from his commanding officer. I might disagree with that these days. I might add that it's like, cuddling with your granddaughter or something. But I was reading this passage, Matthew 25, the sheep and the goats, and I was asking God, I get this concept. There's the group that are sorted, that go into glory, and they're confused. When did we clothe, feed, visit, help you? And he's saying, well, whenever you did it to the least of mine. And the other group, they're confused. Why are we condemned? When I was hungry, you didn't give me anything to eat. When I was thirsty, when I was a stranger, you didn't invite me in. I needed clothes, you didn't clothe me. When I was sick and in prison, you did not look after me. So I'm praying and my phone goes off, and it's a guy, a doctor I met a handful of times, don't really know him. I thought this could be important. I answer it. It's a guy called Michael, and he said, Andrew, this is a long shot, but I'm doing some mission work overseas, and I'd like to be away for a while, but I do a GP clinic in the prison, and I need someone to cover me. And I said, so you're asking me to visit sick people in prison? And he must have thought I was being sarcastic or something. He said, I'm sorry, I've wasted your time. And I said, no. No, I think this is something I'm supposed to do. What's that last verse? I was sick and in prison. So how, if you put yourself in my shoes and you really think this is God telling you to do something, because you just prayed, God, I know this passage, I know it off by heart, but what does it mean to me? And then you get this call. So you can walk into that prison with confidence that God wants you there, that he's going to meet your needs, that this encounter with this guard or this inmate or this nurse is not accidental. Anyone see where we're going with this? You're going to feel like you're on a mission from God, aren't you? Jake and Elroy. There's a confidence that comes with that. But which scenario is that? It's really scenario A, isn't it? Very specific, sick and in prison. So what about scenario B? What about scenario B? What things do you know about God that he may not necessarily specifically have asked you to do, but you know he wants you to do? You can walk into your home knowing how he wants you to be, can't you? You can walk into your workplace. I can walk into an elders meeting or the surgery, and I know how he wants me to be. This is sort of scenario B, isn't it? I know his heart. I know his heart for people. So that can energize us, can't it? And the highest level of love is to do that. thinking about his heart and your life. What else do you know he wants you to be doing? I think Dallas is right. This is the highest level that personhoods can reach. Eric Liddell got it. I've been made for a purpose, for mission, for China, but he's also made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure. That's sort of level B, isn't it? He's getting the heart of God. And athletics isn't unspiritual. Running for Eric is a spiritual activity. He got it. So all of life is meant to be a spiritual activity. And our homework, think about scenario B. Certainly obey scenario A. We are the servants to be gladly surrendered. If you get a specific scenario A, obey it. But think about B. Go deep into the heart of God. Think about your world. What does he want you to be doing? Listen, pay attention. As you know, we're inviting